So we are probably still going to be stuck in the aquatic biome Nearpod slides today. I can't imagine we're going to make it through this, but we'll see how time goes. Maybe we bump over to the terrestrial biomes. We'll find out. And we know that aquatic means the water biomes, which is this slide here. And we've studied 2 aquatic biomes so far. And we've started writing Google Docs, and we'll continue writing our Google Docs on these 2 aquatic biomes today and hopefully move forward to some others. But we've talked about the marine biome, the oceans, the ones that have salt water. And we talked about the different types of biotic and abiotic factors in the ocean that makes it very unique. Salt water being probably the most important of the abiotic factors because the sun, soil, and temperature vary in the oceans depending on where you are and what time of the year it is and what season it might happen to be. We know that there's like 1 million plus different plants and animals. There's no way you're going to cover them all, but you do need to have kind of a general understanding that sharks and jellyfish and starfish live in the ocean, not in the forest or in the savanna or in the jungle or the taiga or the tundra. You do need to know the difference in those animals, and they're not going to give you some strange animal that you've never heard of. They're going to use general animals that most of us are familiar with and that we've gone over. Again, the oceans cover about 70% of the earth, which makes it very understandable to say that it's also the most biodiverse. It has the most different types of life forms. We're not watching this. You can watch that on your own at another time, definitely not today. When you're doing your Google Doc, for those of us that haven't finished the oceans, which is kind of scary to think about, but if you haven't, that's all right. I really feel like writing about kelp is going to give you a good portion of that paragraph about the biotic factors, and you throw something there like sharks and remoras like I did, and boom, you've got your entire biotic paragraph finished. In the abiotic part, you're talking about salt water, which is a very, very important thing, and then you talk about the other 3 abiotic factors vary, and all of a sudden, you're kind of finished. We're going to skip past the nature boom time. If you needed some extra stuff, you can always go with the ocean saltiness and how it can change. And here's that slide for you. And if you needed some other things, again, I mean, coral reefs are kind of their own separate biome, but you can't find a coral reef outside of the ocean. So I'm just going to kind of lump that into the ocean. Then we talked about estuaries. Estuaries are pretty important as well because that's where oceans and rivers meet, and they also have a very special type of water as well, right? Brackish water, that's a mix of fresh and salt water. And they are the nurseries of the sea. So if you're not using the word brackish in your description of estuaries, you're probably already way behind. I would mention that they're the nurseries of the sea because different animals from the ocean come into there to have their babies because it's safer and there's a lot more cover than out in the open ocean. And it says it in like every single one of these slides. Brackish water where rivers and oceans meet, and it's along the coast. Like if you're not putting that somewhere in there, that's probably where you're going to be missing out. And much like the ocean, where the water is probably the most abiotic factor being brackish in the estuary, the sun, soil, and temperature vary depending on where they are. Now the soil is going to be actually pretty good soil because of the way things happen in the estuaries, and things are kind of washing down. It's going to have lots of nutrients in there, so that's a good nutrient-rich soil for decomposers to break down dead and decaying things, and then for plants to grow in that area as well. There's some crazy different types of animals: fish, crabs, lobsters, clams. All those things we're kind of used to seeing. Your river otters, your raccoons. So raccoons, opossums, skunks, and otters are thinking, hey, all these shellfish are here, which is like my favorite thing to eat. So I've got easy access to food, I've got good cover, and then I can go just a little further upstream and get fresh water, and everything's kind of good to live in that area for them. And we'll skip past these couple of videos. Now, if you want to talk about a plant life, you can talk about some other stuff if you want to, like the salt grasses and stuff, if you want to look that up on your own, but we've watched a really cool video about mangrove trees, and the notes are right here, so I'm not too sure why you wouldn't talk about mangrove trees. And all of a sudden, estuaries are done as well. And I did both of them in class with some students yesterday in my 3rd period class, and it took us less than 15 minutes. So if you're still like on the first paragraph of oceans, you need to work a little quicker today because it's not as difficult as you are making it out to be, I promise. And today we're going to be talking about no longer salt water, no longer brackish water, but we're going to talk about our freshwater ecosystem. So if you're at home, you need to watch this video on your own because obviously you can't watch that because of copyright issues. That wouldn't be very good. We'll watch that here in class with each other here in just a second. Lakes and ponds. Lakes and ponds are our first freshwater ecosystem. So when Fabiana jumps to her lakes and ponds Google slide, She's not talking about salt water. She's not talking about brackish water. She's talking about fresh water. In class, how have we decided to describe fresh water? There's a couple of okay answers. Sadie. Water with little to no salt. If you say water with no salt in it, I'm really not going to yell at you. Please don't go to high school and say, Mr. Bullens taught me that all fresh water has no salt in it, because we all know that's not what I said. It has little to no salt in it. And so that's a big, big difference. Again, if you've been knocked over by a wave before in the ocean, right, and you had the water go up your nose, or you had your mouth open, even worse, and you get up, you probably are going to the shore where mom and dad are sitting. You're drying your face off, getting the water out of your eyes, and you're getting something to drink, because that is foul. It is super salty. If you fell in this lake, it's a different story. You're probably just going to spit the water out and keep on playing, because it's fresh water. It's not going to taste super salty. So these bodies of water have, again, low levels of salt, typically less than 1% of salt, is called fresh water. Fresh water. So again, lakes and ponds are aquatic because they're water biomes. Lakes and ponds have fresh water in them. I'm already starting to build that first abiotic paragraph about lakes and ponds. So, my abiotic factors in a lake and a pond. Well, obviously you have fresh water. Is the sunlight the same at every single lake around the world? No, because it depends on where you are. Are there lakes like just below the tundra? Even in the tundra, they'd be frozen. But they get a different amount of sunlight than the lakes here in North Carolina, but then the lakes in Florida get different sunlight than we get here. So you can't say that the sunlight is the same. It's very similar to the ocean and the estuaries. It varies depending on where you are and what time of the year it is. The climate. If I went to High Rock Lake today, I probably could jump in, swim around, have a good time. 3 months from now, probably not such a good idea, right? I would be a popsicle at that point, just kind of floating in ice, waiting for spring to come by and thaw me out. So you can't say that the climate's the same, and every single lake doesn't have the same type of soil. Some lakes have rocky bottoms, some lakes have sandy bottoms, some lakes have like muddy bottoms. It just depends on where you are. So when you're talking about these other three, we come straight back to that unofficial vocabulary word. It varies. It changes depending on where you are. So when we're talking about lakes, the most important is water, because it's fresh water. These other three change depending on what time of year it is and where you're located. The biotic factors are pretty important. You need to be able to live in fresh water. That's an extremely important adaptation. If you are a plant or an animal, you have to be adapted to fresh water. Again, you can't catch a shark and bring it home and put it in the pond behind your house, other than maybe a bull shark, which some of those have adapted to be able to live in fresh and salt water, because they'll swim way upstream in rivers, and there's some super cool stories we can talk about later. But kind of like a clownfish, you can't bring the clownfish in the anemone and put it in the bottom of your pond and think, oh, I'm going to keep Nemo down there forever. It's not going to work. They're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. The type of animals you might see: freshwater fish, insects, reptiles, frogs, turtles, snakes, absolutely. Beavers, ducks, birds, frogs. All of those things that you could imagine seeing in a lake or a pond. Plants, algae. Have you noticed how algae's like everywhere? It's kind of important. Cattails. Who knows what a cattail is? If you've never seen a cattail it looks like a corn dog on the end of a grass stalk.
Yeah, right. And then people bite inside of it, and there's a lot,
See, there's a lot of stuff inside of it. We'll look at that later. And then water lilies, those things that float like lily pads on top. Okay. So lakes and ponds. I mean, I'm looking at the anchor chart. I'm not asking you to like remember every single thing about lakes and ponds, right? It's fresh water and the types of animals that live there, and they have adapted to live in fresh water. That's not one that's like overwhelming on the tests and the quizzes and things. Rivers and streams. Also, not one that we're going to have to remember every single thing about, but there's a few things in rivers and streams that come up that are important. Again, what type of water do you find in a river and stream? Fresh water. Is the soil the same in every single river and stream? No. Is the climate the same? No. Depending on what time of year it is, even a river in North Carolina is going to change on you. And the sun, the amount of sunlight is going to change depending on where you are. So the sun, soil, and climate are going to change. Now the water is not freshwater. Biotic factors, the living things that Veda might find inside of a river and stream. Trout, different types of fish. Again, reptiles, otters, turtles, plants like algae, there they are again, and something called ferns, which I think I actually have like an entire slide on. Here's our adaptations. To live in a river and a stream, you need to be able to survive in fresh water. So no barracudas, no octopus, no kelp in a river and stream. You're not going to find those. So do you notice how you need to kind of know the basic animals that live in these areas? All right, we'll stop there on rivers and streams. So if you're at home, you need to watch this video, and we'll talk about ferns, and I think we'll stop here and we'll work on our Google Docs for this. Ferns, if you look in the background here, these are ferns. They're plants. They reproduce with spores, so it's not like pollen from a flower. They reproduce with spores, so it's not seeds like a flower would have, or pollen. They're different from moss because they have vascular, but you don't need to know that. Like all that stuff. The thing about ferns that I need you to know, and this is it. You don't need to write a whole bunch of this stuff down, Shayla. See what a fern looks like and realize that they are found on the banks of rivers very often because they need a lot of water in order to survive. Now, you'll find them in the woods, but it's typically in woods that get a lot of water. So ferns, that's what a fern looks like. If we see a question that talks about ferns, this is kind of like the coral reef. You really don't need to write a whole lot of this down. Just know that ferns, and we've already written it. I wrote it over there. Ferns are found in rivers. That's about all you need to know about that. You feel good about that? Let me see what the next slide is just to make sure. And this is an amazing facts about ferns that we can watch in class in just a minute. You can watch this at home. And I'm going to stop at wetlands. We'll pick up with Bill Nye tomorrow.